opportunities for students in Addison County. Before we get started and before I turn it over to Senator Hardy and her team, I want to introduce who's here in the front row so that you are aware. We have Matt Crente, who is from Addison Central. He is the Director of Finance and Operations there. We have Patrick Green from Mount Abraham, Superintendent. Wendy Pratt, Assistant Superintendent, or Assistant Director, from Hannaford's. Dr. Nicole McTavish from Hannaford Career Center. Dr. Wendy Baker from Addison Central. Dr. Amy Cole from Lincoln School District. Elizabeth Jennings, Director of Finance and Operations here at Addison Northwest. I'm also supposed to tell you where the exits are. So back where you came and up here on the left. So again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Sheila. And thanks everyone for being here in person, and also if you're watching the live stream or the recording. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I'm one of two senators that represent the Addison district, which is all of Addison County, plus Rochester, Huntington, and Buell's Gore. So there may be, I know there are a few Rochester folks in the room, and there may be folks from those towns watching as well. And so thank you all for spending Saturday morning with us. And I will also introduce, we have Representative Peter Conlon. Peter is from Cornwall, and he'll spend a little time introducing himself more, but he also chairs the Education Committee in the House. And is, like me, a former school board member in the Addison Central School District. We have worked on school policy together for a very long time at this point. Also, Senator Steve Heffernan. Steve and I are the two senators for the Addison district. Steve is from Bristol, and he serves on the Senate Education Committee. So the three of us are here because we are all in committees that have a direct stake in the big bill that's moving through the legislature. I serve on the Senate Finance Committee, which has jurisdiction over school finance and funding. So I wanted to just sort of level set about why we're here and what we're going to be talking about, because I know that there are a lot of questions about education out there. We are here because last year, we saw a very large property tax increase in the state. All of us were impacted by it, including the three of us on stage who also have to pay property taxes. And we heard loud and clear that that was unsustainable for Vermonters. And then last year we established a commission on the future of public education that spent a lot of the fall talking about what should we do. And then in January, the governor came out with his own proposal, and that was introduced as a bill in late February. So two months into the session, we finally got the bill with the information with the governor's plan. The plan is not just about property taxes, and in fact, it's mostly not about property taxes. It's mostly about how to completely overhaul or rework our education system, our K-12 education system in general. And so that's what we're here to talk about. I do know that there are other sort of tangential questions that people have about education, and some people have specific questions about their own kids and students, and I actually direct those questions to that front row of superintendents if you have questions about your own individual student situation. And what we're going to do is Representative Conlon is going to start off by talking about what the governor proposed and then what the House did with that proposal to change it. For everybody to know, the legislative process is that many big bills that have financial implications start in the House, including the budget and the transportation bill, and this bill started in the House. It was introduced in the House. And so Peter's committee had the first stab at it, and then it went to the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax committee in the House, and it probably took stops in a couple other places, and then it went to the House floor. Then it came over to the Senate after it was passed in the House, and it went to the Senate Education Committee first, where Steve serves. So Steve will talk about what the Senate Education Committee did with the bill. And then after that, it's now come to the Senate Finance Committee, where I serve, and I can talk to you about our conversations. And we have the goal of passing the bill out on Thursday. It is a very large bill. It's 160 pages in its current form, and covers a wide variety of topics. So we'll talk about that process, and after it passes out of the Senate Finance Committee and goes to the Senate floor, there'll be a vote in the Senate, and then there'll be what's called a conference committee, where the two House and Senate try to come to a version of the bill that both houses agree on, and then there'll be votes on each floor. So that's the sort of how a bill becomes a law conversation, which is, I think, important for everybody to understand the process and how a bill is traveling through the legislature and why it takes so long. And there are 180 of us that all have to have our fingers on it at least a little bit, some of us more than others. But so that's the process. Now I'm going to turn it over to Peter to talk about how it started and what the House did with the bill.
Thank you, Ruth. Good morning, everybody. I'm Peter Conlon. I'm from Cornwall, as Ruth said. I represent the Addison 2 district, which is Cornwall, Goshen, Leicester, Ripton, and Salisbury. And I'm the chair of the House Education Committee, where this is my 9th year serving on that committee. So talk a little bit about sort of how this all came to be. I mean, education reform has had different iterations over the years. We had Act 46 a decade ago. Previous to that, we had Act 60, Act 68. So it is something that is ever evolving. The sort of real immediate impetus for coming up with some significant education transformation proposals was really last year's budget votes, where many school budgets in the state were voted down, not just once, but often multiple times. We saw that here, both in Vergennes and Bristol, down in the Orwell, which is part of Slate Valley, and around many parts of the state. So the governor and the legislature, we all sort of felt we needed to react to that. But really the roots of this go back much further. Since in the last 40 years, Vermont has lost 40,000 pupils enrolled in our school system. We were at a high at about 123,000 kids in the K-12 system, and we're down to about 83,000 today. So that's a really significant and kind of an incredible demographic change in Vermont. Of course, we see the demographic change in Vermont hitting so many other areas like healthcare, which of course is intricately involved in the cost of education. Well, our school finance system and how we work our property taxes is really based on a per pupil cost basis. And when you lose many, many, many pupils, and it's just a demographic change, that has an impact on what our costs are, especially if the state is not sort of adjusting at the pace at which the demographics are changing. And we see, of course, you see it in the news all the time now about how our declining enrollment in our school system is affecting the choices that we're having to make at a local level. We've seen it in the Addison Central School District with the decision to not have students at Ripton next year, potentially sharing resources among Shoreham and Bridport. Here in Vergennes, there was the effort to move kids from the Addison elementary school. And of course, you can go back even way further, and we can talk about sort of the consolidation from one-room schoolhouses and the closure of schools in Panton and Waltham. But anyway, that's a bit of the history as to how we ended up where we are. And then we could also talk about the escalating costs that we've had to deal with, including healthcare, but also including significant increases in student need. But let me just sort of jump ahead to the kind of where we are today in the legislature. So seeing all this happen, we in the legislature created the Commission on the Future of Public Education last year. This was essentially before we had a new permanent Secretary of Education on board, and we were really feeling like there needed to be something in place with a public process that would come back to the legislature with some firm recommendations and proposals to move forward with how do we create an education system that recognizes this huge demographic change, that still allows students to have significant opportunity, but at a cost that Vermonters can afford. Well, so we were, and I'm on the Commission for the Future of Public Education as well. And so we've been working through a public process. At the same time, the governor and the Secretary of Education and the administration was working, I would say, quietly, sort of unbeknownst to many of us, on a significant education proposal of their own. So that really became the proposal that has set the agenda. And it was introduced, as Ruth said, formally as a bill 2 months into our legislative session. We usually only meet for 4.5 months, so that was a little concerning. But we have been really doing our best to respond to it. And I just thought I'd talk a little bit about what was in that originally, what the House proposal came out with, and sort of the shared visions and goals that are in them. So the governor's proposal, as many of you might have heard about, really talked about creating a state with, we currently have 119 school districts and 50, probably better to think of it as 52 supervisory unions or 52 districts that there's a superintendent and a central office in place. You can think of Addison County, we have 3 that are fully within the county, and then we have other supervisory unions that pick up various towns in the system as well. So the governor came out with a proposal to go from 52 to 5. Pretty big deal. Addison County in that proposal would be in a district that ran from the Canadian border to Brandon and include Franklin, Chittenden, and Addison counties. I'm sorry, Franklin, Chittenden and Addison County. As well as some significant other sort of ways to build scale and hopefully reduce costs, such as looking toward much larger schools and much higher student-teacher ratios. And then all of that would be funded with what we call a foundation formula, a new modern foundation formula based on empirical evidence. I would say that as this bill came to the House Education Committee, we shared many of these goals. We recognized that we probably have too many sort of central offices and superintendencies that we don't really need to have. There's a lot of redundancy. In Addison County, we have 3 superintendents, 3 directors of special ed, 3 business managers, all of whom are busy all the time. But we have to wonder, in Addison County or really elsewhere around the state, do we really need that level of redundancy in such a small geographic area? I mean, another example I'll give is the other day, our committee took a field trip from Montpelier to Barry, to Spalding High School. And in that short, by the way the crow flies, about 8 miles, maybe 10, we drove by 3 different central offices for the 3 different school districts that you sort of drive through to go from Montpelier to Barry. So I think we all recognize that we need to, we can probably achieve savings and efficiency and scale and bring some of the resources that we're putting into administration into education by reducing the number of districts. The governor proposed this student-teacher ratio of 25-1. I think that most of us can agree that sort of on a Vermont scale and sort of even with our basic infrastructure of school buildings, classrooms, probably, and frankly teachers with today's student needs, a 25-1 ratio is pretty challenging. But the House agreed that we do need to start thinking about what is an appropriate class size, especially for the value that Vermonters need to get from their tax-paying dollars, but also educationally speaking. You know, a 3rd grade of 3 or 4 kids is not nearly as educationally sound as a 3rd grade of 15 kids. And you can probably talk to almost any teacher and they would agree with that. So we agreed that that also needed to be taken into account. We also agree that we need to be looking at schools that are larger. But we don't really have a vehicle to make that happen right now because the cost of construction and the state is contributing no money towards school construction at this point in time. It used to contribute up to 30% for some major projects. Probably the last one done in Addison County was the middle school in the 1990s in Middlebury. But we agreed with a lot of that. We also agreed that the state does need to transition to a foundation formula. A foundation formula done correctly can create a stable and predictable funding stream for schools that those who are educational leaders in those schools can target that money at students and the students who need the resources brought to them. Right now we live in a world where a school board and a superintendent advising them has to sort of predict what the voters will accept. It can vary wildly across the state where Addison Central, for example, continues to have budgets approved at a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio, while just next door in Slate Valley, spending significantly less on a per pupil basis, they continue to vote down budgets. So we've created a very inequitable system where the amount of money being spent per student is very different, even in areas that are right next to each other. You can just look at sort of Shoreham and Orwell, 2 towns right next to each other, very different levels of spending on a per pupil basis. So we sort of took a lot of these goals that the governor had, we shared them, but we did take a bit of a different approach. And we decided that the level of scale that the governor was proposing was probably not the level of scale that Vermonters would find acceptable. And so what we proposed in ours was to create a state with school districts of about 4,000 students each. 4,000 being a number that the research, and there's not a lot of research on this, but shows that that's when you sort of hit some key hallmarks of gaining efficiency, where you sort of move from, if you start going much higher, you start having to hire a lot of middle management because the numbers just get too big and the geography gets too big. We certainly put in ours as well aspiration for larger schools, and sort of like to think of it as like, we can certainly agree that we want to keep our youngest students as close to home as possible. But as we start moving into the middle school grades and the high school grades, some regionalization can take place. We have high schools that are still graduating fewer than 24 kids in their graduating class, often far less than that. And I mean, really, like within a 10-mile drive of Rutland High School, we have 3 high schools that are in that number. So we certainly see the value and the opportunities that exist for kids educationally if we move to sort of larger regional middle schools and high schools. And so we put in what I would call incentives for that, not requirements for that. And we also talked about class sizes. We see class size averages, minimum class size averages, as a way to really achieve scale, offer school boards and superintendents some guidance from the state that they can use to put in place. And this is a real way that is an educationally sound way to gain efficiencies while also expanding opportunity and quality education for kids. So we crafted a bill with a lot of those same goals in them, but probably I would say at a much, I would call it Vermont level than the governor had proposed. And many of us on our committee come from the education world. For me, I was just a school board member. We have teachers. We have other school board members, and people who have been in the area for a while. So that's what we came up with, and then it was sent over to our House Ways and Means Committee, and they got to work on property tax changes and reform. The most significant which, in terms of education, is creating a foundation formula that was more based on what we are spending today that would scale toward, and as we achieve cost-saving goals, scaling towards a foundation formula that would reflect achieving those savings, but not before the infrastructure was in place to actually have those savings be achieved. And again, a foundation formula is something that it does create winners and losers. Some districts are going to get more money, some districts are going to get less, but it is much more equitable. And it allows our educational leaders to say, we know how much we're getting year to year. We can not only plan for next year, we can plan for future years to create the best system that we have. And rather than trying to guess what the voters can afford, they can manage to an amount of money that has been sort of academically derived as adequate for our students. Anyway, that is the bill that essentially passed out of the House. There's a lot more to it than that, and it was hard to get the number of votes to get it out of the House. I'll admit that. Education is very difficult. Coalitions start popping up from those who are very protective of what might happen to their small town schools, from elementary schools to high schools. There are those who are from areas where no schools operate and they have choice and they want to protect what they have. So education sort of blurs political lines, and is really becomes more about where you live and what your sort of educational delivery system is in that area. So that is why it didn't exactly go roaring out of the House with a huge vote in favor of it, and the same will probably happen in the Senate. We passed it over to the Senate. It went to Steve's committee. They made some significant changes in it that I'll let Steve go over, and they passed it out of their committee, and it is now in Ruth's committee. But again, as Ruth said, this is sort of the long, thoughtful, democratic process that can take a lot of time and be a little frustrating to people. And it can be a little frustrating to us because we have people out in the public reacting to things that are 2 weeks old and we've made significant changes. So it's very hard for the public to keep up with as well. Anyway, sorry I talked so long. Steve, here you go.
Thank you, Peter. Steve Heffernan, Addison County, live in Bristol. So, hearing from these two who have plenty of experience up at the Capitol, it's very informative, as they say, of what they're saying. For me, being a freshman and not knowing a lot about education stepping into this, it was getting a whole lot of information, overwhelming information, and trying to make sense of it. But being as a layman of, owning an excavation company, paying taxes, sending kids to school, grandkids to school, and just concerns that we're not getting the education our kids should be getting for the money that we're spending. And I think that's an echo that we've heard from all Vermonters. And that's why the governor was challenged, and he did come up with a plan. Was it a great plan? No. I think people will definitely say, but it gave us a foundation to start at. And as I said, went into Peter's committee, and they made some changes, some good changes. Then it came over to our committee, and it got even some more changes. So some of the things that we did is, first, we eliminated class sizes. Our mindset under that was we have to look out for the small schools that are being very efficient and are able to work within the budget that they are given. If you demand class size, that was a worry that, hey, you're not meeting that, and we'll have to force you to do something with your school that may be working efficiently, but you're not meeting the size. So that's why we removed class sizes from the bill. We changed from going to a subcommittee to do a study to a task force made up of legislators on the Senate, 4 from the Senate and 4 from the House. The reason for this is at the end of the day, it will be the House and the Senate that will be deciding how our future education system is going to work. And they make decisions on a lot of other very important items, so it's important to have the legislators be the ones to be able to work on it and then work around the State House talking to other senators and representatives of what the study has brought and found, and doing it. They do a lot of other hard work, so doing this is no different. We will check with all the proverbial V's. That's the superintendents, the principals, the NEA, parents, rural Vermont. There's a slew of committees and people that need to be talked with and gone over for. And if you can't tell, I'm still nervous from having to stand up in front of a crowd and be nervous, so I apologize if I'm a little stuttery. So that's why we're going to switch to a task force. And again, this is all up in the air. It'll go to committee on committee, and some might last, some may be taken out. So please just, this is the changes we made. Will they stay? That'll be foreseen. We changed the foundation formula more. It's going to go over to Ruth's committee, so I'm not going to speak much on that because it'll probably get changed around some more. But we feel, as Peter said, that foundation formula is going to let schools know what they have per person, per pupil to spend, and it'll make budgeting a lot easier and harder at times, because Addison, I can tell you right now, under the foundation formula, is going to get hit hard. And so what that is trying to do is say, hey, towns, super districts, start making changes to make it affordable. And our superintendents and principals do know ways. It's just getting the townspeople to make tough decisions when it comes to saying, hey, do we have to combine Mount Abe and Vergennes, let's say? And just using that as an example, that is not what I'm saying is going to happen, but it's worth looking at. And if it's going to save us money down the line, the towns really need to say, we need to do it. But we hate to give up our independence. Same with small towns. Lincoln is they hated to give up their independence, and they're showing that they can operate with the money that will be coming out, so why would you close them? But there may be a few years down the line that it no longer is efficient, and they may have to join Bristol. And Beeman Academy, we're looking at those. And these are just local that I know of. We have people come in from many different districts that say the same thing. They know the schools that are struggling. They know what the best route may be to join schools together. It's just that we hate to give up our independence of the schools that we have, and rightly so. We're stubborn Vermonters, and sometimes we'd rather dig a hole deeper than try to get out of it. Then healthcare, I guess, is going to be turned over to the Committee of the Future Education, right? It's that event. That's okay. Okay. Well, I'll take that one back then. Those were the three major changes that I saw. There is a lot of changing that's going to happen between the Education Board and the Agency of Education. And as I said, this is still in liquid form, but I do think that Vermonters do want positive change. And up and foremost, it's about our children, making sure they get a good education. And it's relying on, again, our superintendents, our principals, our teachers to say, this is what's really best for our kids. This is how they're going to get their best education. Yes, sorry, he might have to drive 20 more minutes to go to school, but the education he's going to get is going to be far more than sitting in a small classroom with the opportunities that he's not getting that he could get from they could get from a bigger classroom. So, is that it?
There's one right here. Well, thank you, Peter and Steve. After the bill passed out of the Senate Education Committee, it has come to the Senate Finance Committee. Each committee has its own what's called jurisdiction. So they're the topics that the committee is supposed to be talking about, what we're allowed to be talking about. So there were a number of things that Peter and Steve's committees worked on that we are being told in the Finance Committee that we're not allowed to touch, which is a little unfortunate because some of the changes that were made in the Senate Education Committee are not changes that I agree with, and I'm not sure that we will have the opportunity to change them in the Finance Committee. I may be able to change them on the floor, but I'm not sure. But the Senate Education Committee version of the bill removed a lot of the sort of planning and sort of future-looking work that needs to be done about standards, about working with the Board of Education, the State Board of Education, about the way to improve quality in our schools. And for some reason, the Senate Education Committee removed a lot of that language. They also made it a lot easier for private schools to get funding in our state. The House had really sort of made it much more logical and equitable, and the Senate Education Committee took out those provisions. So many people don't know, but we send money out of state to allow kids to go to private schools out of state. We're one of the only states in the country that does that, and the House version of the bill would have removed that ability. The Senate version of the Senate Education version put that back in, which I don't think we should be sending money out of state for private school education. So those are some of the things that I'm not sure that we'll be able to work on in in the Finance Committee, unfortunately, some other things about coordinating across the state among schools on calendars and planning and finances and stuff as well. But the foundation formula, one of the things that the Senate Education Committee did was change the foundation formula in a way that I find really challenging. The House version of the foundation formula is an empirically based formula based on, as Peter was saying, the cost of education in Vermont right now. It was done by an expert, a national expert who's worked on education finance in the state of Vermont and nationally for many years, named Tammy Colby. Excuse me. And the Senate Education Committee changed the formula to be sort of a hodgepodge of a formula, taking things from different places, and that doesn't work. It has to be sort of comprehensively, empirically based. And I know this is a lot of information, and for those of you who are not don't keep up with this on a daily basis like we do, a lot of this is probably not making sense to you, and we are going to answer questions. So, so just bear with me. What we have right now is a tax-based formula where you all vote on our budgets, and then after the school boards have set the budgets and said this is what we think we need to spend, you all vote on them, and then the state sets what's called the yield, which results in a tax rate that's individual for each district based on your spending, but also based on what's happening statewide. A foundation formula, if there's a foundation formula, there would no longer be local school votes. And I think that that's really important for you all to understand. There would not be local school votes on the basic budget for schools. Schools would get an amount per pupil, and then they would get a foundation amount, and then an amount above that for different types of pupils, whether they are students living in poverty or students who need ELL services, English language services, or students who have special education services, or students in small schools or really rural areas. And that's why it's called a foundation. It sort of builds on itself. And so our superintendents would be told this is what you get, and then you have to work within this budget. And you all wouldn't vote on the budget, except for one provision about what's called excess spending. I think that's what it's supplemental spending. And then there would be some provisions for some very modest supplemental spending that would require a vote. But not all districts would choose to use the supplemental spending. So I think that's really important for you all to understand, is there would be a change in how it's voted. So the foundation formula becomes extremely important, and to have a well-researched, empirically based, adequate foundation formula that is constitutionally sound is incredibly important. And the Senate Education Committee's version is not that. So that is one of my major goals, is to change that back to a formula that's more in line with what the House did. And that is a bottom line for me. The Senate Finance Committee is also the tax committee, and this hasn't been talked about very much, but how would it be taxed? Right now, as I said, there's a different tax rate per district based on the spending and then our property values in districts. With a foundation formula, there would be a statewide tax rate. So everyone would have the same tax rate, and then it would be adjusted by property values. And what has been sort of alluded to, and I think said by Steve, is that Addison County actually would, based on our current spending, we would actually lose quite a bit of funding per pupil in Addison County under a new formula. However, our tax rates would probably also go down. So depending on what your perspective is, that could be good news or bad news, or a mixed. And so but that's a reality of this change for the Addison district, and it makes it really difficult for the three of us as we're sort of looking at education policy statewide, but also what happens to schools and taxpayers in our district. The Senate Finance Committee also is looking at how do we equalize tax for people who are low income. Right now, our formula is very much based on if you're lower income, you pay lower taxes. And how do we maintain that in a foundation formula? There was a proposal by the governor to create a tax exemption for if you're lower income, you would have part of your property exempt from property taxes, part of your value of your property. The House expanded that, and now we're looking at that provision. But anytime we lower one person's property taxes, you raise somebody else's property taxes. So what's the right balance and where's the right line? So that's a big conversation we're having in the Senate Finance Committee. We're also talking about the supplemental spending. How much should it be? What should it be for? Should we equalize that across the state? And finally, we're talking about school construction. We have the schools in the country, and this school is an exception, but based on the school, how good our schools are in facilities. I'm trying to think of the right word here. The facilities of our schools, we have some of the oldest and most rundown schools in the country, and we've done a great job in Addison County, but in a lot of parts of the state, the schools are really, really not functional in the way that they should be. So in order to improve our education, we have to really improve our facilities. And if we are going to potentially consolidate schools, we might need to build schools in order to combine two small schools. So we are also, in the version of the bill, there is a provision about trying to bring back that state support for school construction that we had 15 or 20 years ago. And then I think that's the major things. There are a lot of other little details, but that's where we're at. And we are planning on trying to vote the bill out of committee this week. And I'm still trying to figure out, depending on what changes are made in the Senate Finance Committee, whether or not I'll be able to even vote for the bill. I want to say a couple things before we go to questions. One, you just got a ton of information. Many of you who are on my email list, I sent out links to a lot of the bill and the summaries and the sort of the information that we're all getting. We had hoped to have, I had hoped to have a presentation. That's why there's a screen here. But we have been completely swamped in the legislature this week, and I have had no time to make a presentation for y'all. But I would love to be able to send out information afterwards. If you are not on my email list and want to be emailed the information, I'm going to point to my friend Nikki Dobreva and first thank her for helping me get this forum up and running. Nikki said she wanted a forum, and I said, if you want a forum, can you help me do it? And she said yes. And so she has helped me get this to go, and with the help of Glory Martin over here, who is the administrative coordinator for the district, for the Vergennes district. So I really want to thank the two of them for their efforts. So yes, let's clap for them. Thank you both. And Nikki has a clipboard with a piece of paper. If you're not on my email list and want to get this information, sign up and I'll make sure you get the email afterwards with information. Oh, and Peter has one more thing to say, and then I'm going to turn it over to see if any of the superintendents or business managers here have anything they want to add. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Ruth. I just want to say that this is what we're doing this year is just the first chapter. Steve talked about this group of legislators or a group of non-legislators, and the topic there was really about creating these newer, larger districts. So if we move forward and we create newer, larger districts, these districts will have to be governed. So we need to decide how many school board members are on them, how do we elect these school boards, and then we're going to have to sort of create in the form of charters how each of these new, larger districts will operate. One of the real challenges we have is that as you create newer, larger districts, these districts start having different ways of delivering education. So just for example, if Lincoln were to sort of be part of a larger Addison County district, it only operates K-6. whereas every other district school in the district operates K-12. How we make that sort of a function, and then there are other parts of the state where there are even more sort of mixed delivery systems, and sort of how we make those function under the same government so that everybody has the same equal opportunity is something that we're going to have to work out that's going to be very tricky.
Yeah, and thank you. That was the thing I was trying to remember that I wanted to mention was the way that the new districts would potentially be created. The House created a subcommittee that has sort of experts, former superintendents and school board members who've worked in the field to help create the district with the help of geographers and educators and people who understand how to make maps. The Senate Education Committee changed that to a group of 8 legislators, which don't have the expertise and would make the process political, I think. So I think that that is a big change. I'm very concerned about that. I think that there needs to be a committee of people who understand how to make maps and who understand education and who understand financing if we are going to change our districts. And the 5-district map that the governor proposed was not workable, but there are a lot of different ways to do it if we want to change our districts to make them larger and more efficient, but they have to be logical. Also, if we implement a foundation formula with our current districts, it will be very difficult for many of our districts to function with the amount of money they get if they are not part of a larger district, because the foundation formula is really based on larger districts. So I want to just turn it over. Do you have a microphone down there, Sheila?
Yes.
Yeah. If the superintendents or business managers have anything they want to add, please, this is your opportunity before we go to questions.
Is this, oh great, it is on. I guess I would just add a couple of things. That was a good segue to a concern that's on my mind. Without any consolidation and without a statewide approach to scale, without a strategic approach to scale. Right now, the bill doesn't have any aspects of scale. We would not have the tools that we need to adapt to the coming funding formula. We wouldn't have the tools to stay the way we are. We wouldn't have the tools to adapt. There wouldn't be any solutions for us. So it really leaves us in a tough place. And I think more immediately, as we get back to work doing budget in the fall, I am concerned about the $118 million being applied against the current year's budget, because we won't have that next year either. So I'm very worried about budgeting in the coming year as well. So that's what I would add. Who else wants to say anything? Patrick?
Yeah, first I guess I want to give thanks to our legislators, those on the stage and others that are in the room too. And we can agree or disagree politically with the ideas that are tossed around, but the reality is they're spending a lot of time doing the hard work. It's often a thankless job, and that's much appreciated. My goal in life is to make complex things simpler, at least in my own mind. And we heard a lot of information, and as they said, it really only scratches the surface of the depths they're getting into. What I appreciate about what they said, and what I synthesized it down to some degree, is we're talking about, yes, affordability is what sparked these big, heavy conversations that are happening, but it's much, much more than affordability. It's about equity, it's about opportunity, and it is about affordability. Affordability is also really important, as we have learned. When I think about equity, unless we are going to be spending a whole lot more as a state, it means there are sort of, I don't really like to think of it this way, but winners and losers, as Peter was talking about. And unless we're spending more as a state, money is going to have to shift from some place to other places. Addison County has historically been in the top 25% in the highest spending per pupil in the state. That's why we're one of the places, we're actually the most impacted county in the state in a foundation formula. That makes it really hard, but it doesn't make it the wrong thing to do. I actually think a foundation formula does get us to a much more equitable place. Vermont is not at all equitable, as the examples spoke to before. Opportunity. We've lost a third of our students in the last 40 years. and we're not done. As schools get smaller and smaller, especially high schools, the opportunities we can provide our kids decrease over time. So if we don't do something, we're going to continue to decrease the opportunities we're providing our students. Our students in small high schools get dramatically different experiences and opportunities than our students in large high schools. That's a reality. That debate is a little bit weaker as you get into elementary schools, but I don't think there's really much debate at the high school level. Despite efforts around virtual high school, we're trying a lot of creative things, and it's not quite the same as having an adult in front of you and that human connection. And affordability. From my perspective, and I think what you see it in the legislature, you'd see it among superintendents, there are a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different opinions. We're not all on the same page. From my perspective, we can't get to the kind of affordability while improving opportunity without achieving something more in terms of scale. And I think that is district, so here I am as a superintendent saying there should be fewer superintendents. I agree. There should be probably less than half of what we have right now. And we need fewer schools for the opportunity and the affordability. To fix all of our current schools, the most recent assessment, which is probably a soft assessment, is $6 billion. The cost to fix all of those buildings seems like it kind of works against this affordability aspect that we're trying to achieve. So by that nature alone, we really have to think critically about how many schools do we operate. And the fortunate thing is I think we have some choice here. And the choice that I've sort of talked about in our region for a while has been we can choose really strong education, we can choose reasonable tax rates, we can choose to keep all of the buildings and all of the structures and everything as it is now. We get to pick two of those three things. Well, we get to vote oftentimes on how many districts we have and how many schools we have. And we get to vote on budgets and our tax rates. We don't vote on quality of education, but that is the default. So we get to pick two of those three things, and really in a nutshell, everything that we're hearing today and have for the last few months boils down to, of those three options, what are we picking?
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm from Lincoln, and I won't take much of your time. I simply want to also thank you for your work. I think as you have learned, if you haven't watched it or you learned today, this is a really complex problem. It's overhauling a system that is hundreds of years old. And I know from watching your work, and we all understand that solving complex problems and making large organizational change is rarely done well when it's done quickly or absent of information or critical data. And I know you all have done a beautiful job of really insisting on making sure that you have accurate information in front of you. We all care about the same thing. We want what's best for our kids and our families. And I guess the last thing that I'll say is we all recognize that each community, each district is unique. And I know that the members of the legislature are particularly sensitive to that. So I want to, again, thank you for your work.
I'm Wendy Baker, and I have the privilege of serving Addison Central and its communities, and it's really nice to see the bright lights on you all today, as opposed to us, since we're normally in that circumstance. I think what I would want to add is that, these conversations are not unfamiliar to Addison Central now or in the past, as people know. If you're here from one of the Addison Central towns, you know that we, in building our FY26 budget, actually have streamlined our operations in order to invest more than $1 million into math performance in our students. So we already went to class sizes of 15. We're working our way through that. We have students from Ripton that will be attending Salisbury. Communities of Shoreham and Bridport are talking about whether or not a multi-grade class of 15 is what's doable to bring an 8-year-old child who is below the standard in math to be at the standard in math by the time they're 9 years old. You know, these are the kinds of conversations that we have the pleasure of having, because our work is both systemic and it is also focused on the child and what is happening with the child. And I think what I really appreciate about what Addison Central has done that I would commend the legislators for considering, and hope certainly that as the final product moves through the legislature, it reflects, is in ensuring that as we are finding savings, because we're working at scale, because we are managing our delivery system, we are reinvesting as much of that as we can in our children in ways that are measurable and that are going to bring them forward, because that is what our strong communities and strong state will benefit most from. And I want to make sure that we're not losing sight of that, as we go. The other thing I just want to remark on is that, Addison Central, if you look at any of the materials, Addison Central is listed as one of the districts in the state that stands to lose the most dollars in the transition to a foundation formula. That is in part because the data that is reflective of our district is not correct. We actually don't stand to lose as much as the reporting that is currently out there says we will lose. And the difference is in the millions of dollars, because the data of the number of students that need extra support in our district based on their family income circumstances or their need to learn English language, it isn't correct. We have more of them than is stated in the modeling that has come out of the Joint Fiscal Office. And it's understandable that data isn't necessarily quite right each time it comes out. We certainly face that. However, it is really important that we are not making large decisions quickly with inaccurate data. And so I really commend the committees that have taken their time to be able to work through some of the pieces of this in a manner that makes sure that we get it right. And that matters to our kids, and it matters to all of us who serve our kids on a daily basis. So I appreciate that.
My name is Nicole McTavish. I'm the superintendent and director of the Hannaford Career Center. And our journey is just a little bit different than the regular K-12 school districts, because our conversation is going to be largely happening next school year. I think we have two other pieces which are a little bit different. While enrollment overall is declining in the state, the career technical centers across the state are actually experiencing increased enrollment. And this is a trend that we're seeing across the United States. I think young people today are seeing the value in going into trades. I also think it's critical in Vermont, right, where we have many people retiring out of the trades, that we emphasize and support students moving into the trades. We have in our center, we have 21 programs, and those programs are very closely aligned. We work with our business people in the Addison County so that our programs are aligned with what Addison County needs and what the state of Vermont needs. We're also, career technical education is more expensive than regular ed, and that is one of the pieces of this very complex puzzle. But I'm very happy to say that even though we are more expensive per pupil, we serve 1 in 3 high school students in all of Addison County, but our cost is less than 5% of the overall education spending in the county. So I think you all get a really good bang for your buck with the services that we have. Our concern over time is that we are very fortunate in that our community, the Addison County community, has supported us to have a remodel of our facility so that all of our industry spaces are up to the standard of the industry, with all the appropriate air handling, all the appropriate machinery, and all of that. And so we stand ready to serve more students. Where career centers to our north and to our south are turning students away, we have space for those students. So my hope is that over time, as this larger transformation occurs, that we open the doors to any student that desires to have CTE that can come to our center, as we have about 200 spaces available in our center, and other CTE centers are at this point having to turn them away. So when we have a unemployment rate in Vermont of something less than 3%, and we have about 50% of our students who currently are not seeing themselves as a college-bound student, it's really critical that we support our career technical students so that all students can have a high-wage, high-demand, high-skilled job in their future. And all of us can pick up the phone and call a plumber or an electrician or a carpenter when we need them. So our journey will happen largely next year. You'll hear a lot more about CTE next year, but we certainly appreciate all of the support that this community has given the Hannaford Career Center.
All right, thank you. I think we hit every district, so I appreciate you all so much, and thank you for sharing your perspectives. We, for many people who are on my list or who saw it on Front Porch Forum, there was a form to submit questions in advance. So we do have some questions that have been shared with the three of us that I think we're going to start with, and then we're going to move to questions from the audience if we don't answer or haven't answered your questions. Or if you're confused by all of this information, we can hopefully help clarify. But first, before I forget, I see Representative Rob North out in the audience and just wanted to give him a shout out for coming. He represents this area, the five towns up here, 6 towns up here. And then is Matt here? Rep Byrong, he was maybe going to come. And then we have former Representative Dave Sharp, who represented Bristol area for many, many years and served as Peter's predecessor as chair of the Education Committee. So just want to acknowledge the two of them in the audience as well. So the first question, I think I'm going to, I've sort of, there was a question, right, about when is redistricting going to be implemented, and Peter started to talk about this a little bit, and how do we retain control of our local schools under the new district proposal, and how will small schools be affected by this? So there is, I'm going to talk about the redistricting, and then I'm going to turn it over to the local control and small schools to Peter, but there are different timelines in different versions of the bill, and the governor's version of the bill, it would have redistricted and start the new formula and new districts in 3 years, so starting on July 1st of 2027, actually in 2 years, in 2027, and July 1st of 2027. So 2 years to do all of that work. And then the Senate, or the House version gave 4 years to do that work and started on July 1st of 29, I believe. And then the Senate Education Committee went back to the governor's timeline of 2027, July 1st of 2027. I have been involved, or I was involved, as was Peter, in Act 46 and the redistricting that happened during Act 46, and there is a lot of work to do to create new school districts, and some of it involves a lot of legal work, a lot of financial work, a lot of community outreach and public engagement work, a lot of just sort of elections work. And so I am very concerned about trying to start new districts in 2 years. I just do not think it's feasible. So I'm hoping that we can come to a compromise, perhaps, of 2028, that might give us a little bit more time, but also acknowledge the more of the urgency. So that is in terms of the timeline, and that assumes that we do move forward with new districts. But how about the local control and small schools, Peter?
Thanks. I think that what we're going to see moving forward is what we saw with Act 46, but at a larger level. And I would say at a level that is going to feel a little bit more state imposed than Act 46. Act 46 was essentially a voluntary process for most districts. Here in Addison County, our 3 supervisory unions all voluntarily voted to merge together into 3 school districts governed by 1 board. If we move to a state with far fewer districts, that's really going to have to be drawn by the legislature and sort of chartered by the legislature. And so that is going to be a complex process in and of itself, as Ruth said. But so we are, in fact, I would say, just as we did with Act 46, moving toward a different level of local control, I would say, if you want to talk about sort of identifying as a town, then it's just as Act 46. I think most people feel like it reduced the amount of local control as we move to larger governing boards. I don't think one could say this is going to be anything different than that. We're moving to larger districts, larger boards, where a group of people who have to be carefully elected are going to be making decisions that will be hard, that will hopefully be based on guidance from the state to help them along, and that it's going to be really geared toward kids. One of the big challenges we've had in Vermont, and I think we're going to see this in a lot of areas, in our emergency services, all of the things that we provide currently on a town basis, is becoming hard to do just in terms of people, but also fiscally, and just from a governance point of view. And I think education's probably at the forefront of moving towards more and more sort of regional governance, where we have to think about, sort of all of our kids, not just the kids that are in this small area where the lines were drawn back in the 1600s. So the impact, it's going to be challenging. I mean, this is not necessarily a bill that I'm jumping up and down and celebrating. This is a bill that recognizes that we have lost 40,000 students in the past 40 years and really haven't reckoned with that to the level that we probably need to in order to have a high-quality education system that is affordable and provides equitable opportunities for students. So I can't really sugarcoat it, but what I can say is that I think that people recognize that we do want to keep our youngest children as close to home as possible, but that as we get into the upper grades of middle school and high school, that we probably are cheating our kids out of opportunity as we sort of hold them into small schools that can't offer the same after-school activities, the same other opportunities. My kids went to school in Cornwall, and we've always, that was back when everybody had an individual board and all that. And I would look at the kids at Mary Hogan, and people would say, "Oh my gosh, that big, huge school." Well, they had French, they had a full band, they had chorus. We just didn't have the numbers to make any of those things happen. So when I think of moving to larger systems, I really think about the opportunity that we can expand for children.
Okay, so we're an hour in, and I feel the energy dropping. So before we go to the next question, and I'm going to have a little audience participation. I see one future student in the audience, back with his dad back there, Sonny. Are there any other future students in our school system? All right, well, yay, Sonny. We have I think you're a current student. What grade? First grade, where? Here in Vergennes or in Salisbury? Ferrisburg, yay! Thank you for coming. Any other students or future students in the audience? Okay, how many people have kids in the school right now? Oh, yes, that's great. How many people have grandkids in the school right now? Awesome. That's great. I know there's at least one person in the audience who was talking to me beforehand who graduated from this stage and is an alum from this school. John, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, graduated on this stage. That's awesome. So how many people graduated from this school? Okay, we have a few graduates in here. That is awesome. And how many other people graduated from an Addison district school, broadly speaking, including Rochester and Huntington? Awesome. That's so great. So everybody has skin in the game in some way or another, either as a future, current student, parent, grandparent, alum, community member, taxpayer, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank you all for coming, and also acknowledge that everybody's looking at this from a slightly different perspective too, because if you have kids in the school and you're a parent, you care about it in a different way than you do if you are a grandparent, or if you don't have kids in the school, or if you have future kids in the school. So I think that's important to acknowledge, and just wanted to give you all a chance to raise your hands and wiggle around a little bit. If you need to wiggle more, go for it. It's been an hour of sitting and listening to us talk. So Thank you. I'm going to move to the next question, which is about how will the foundation formula work, and how do we know the one that's proposed will actually work? I talked about this a little bit, so I'm going to turn it over to Steve because his committee made a bunch of changes to it.
So on the foundation formula, we all start out at base about 14,836. I think we changed it to. I'm not 100% certain on that number, but it's almost $15,000 per student. And then, as we said, which is weights. Weights, something I learned about this year. Weights are on what every child with either low income, non-English speaking, special needs, that they add a certain amount of weight to that category that brings you from 14,000 up to as much as 50,000. So we took the weights, and as Ruth was saying, we changed it around some, but the weights, if you look, are not much different than, you go ahead and speak with that if you want, but they're about the same weights as the House picked. So, and then being verified, you always get two sides that, hey, we verified it this way, we're verifying it that way, and that's kind of what we've gotten into between the two. So the foundation formula is great if you're to scale. Right now, Vermont will not be to scale with having as many kids as they need to be in this, so it will actually cost us more probably, and it'll make it harder. But that's about as much as I can say. I'm still learning as we go about the scaling. I do know we took testimony from both sides, and I believe that they are both have validity in them.
So do you want to say anything, Peter, or you want me to? So the foundation formula, as I was talking earlier about, is really important that it be based in actual research and empirical analysis, and that's the kind of formula that came out of the House. And one of the reasons that you can't just mix and match weights with bases is for the mathematicians, or we're talking about proficiency in math. This is one of the reasons why we need our kids to be proficient in math, is so they understand the school funding formula. But the weights themselves are proportional to the base. So that if you take a weight from a different formula and you put it on a base, it's no longer proportional. And they're proportional based on the cost of educating a student for an adequate education that meets a specific standard. You heard the superintendents talk about the standards they're trying to meet for their kids. Those are the standards we want everybody to meet. And it costs a certain amount based on an empirical analysis, a regression analysis done by a statistician who has a ton of experience doing this, to say this is how much it costs on average to educate a student who has, for example, level 1 English language learning needs in our schools in order to be able to meet the standard of learning English well enough to advance to level 2. And so that's how the empirically based formula that the House passed out is done. It's based on what is the actual cost, what are the actual standards, and what are the actual adequacy for meeting those standards. And it's proportional to each other. The base amount in the House version was $15,033 per kid. And then the weights, if it's a 0.2 weight, that's 20% of $15,033. So if you change the $15,033, 20% of a different number gets you a different cost. And so that's why it's important that the math work out. And so yay for math standards and for the people who can understand how a formula works. And that's why it's really important that the formula be empirically based, and why I, who was a very good math student, really have been driving this home. You can watch the video of me on Thursday explaining this to the Finance Committee, where I wrote on the whiteboard an example of how the math works. And it's really, really important. We expect our kids to understand math, and we need our legislature to understand the math that goes behind this formula. Otherwise, it's not a formula that provides an adequate amount of funding to educate our kids to the type of standards that we want them to meet. So hopefully that helped a little bit, and I'm happy to do a little whiteboard work with you afterwards if anybody wants it, or I can send it out in an email. Okay, so the next question I'm going to direct to Peter is, how will school choice and homeschooling work under the proposal, and will public funds be directed toward private schools?
Well, I'll just take homeschooling first. This anticipates no difference in the, I would say, gentle oversight that the state has in terms of homeschooling. One of the challenges that tends to tie us up in knots in the legislature when it comes to education reform and education funding is the fact that we have areas of the state where they do not have a public school available. Probably the biggest example of that is what we call our 4 historic academies that many of us growing up just thought was another high school. St. Johnsbury Academy, Burton Academy, Linden Institute, and Thetford Academy. So these are areas that don't operate high schools. And for 100, 200 years, these independent schools have served that purpose. In the early 90s, a law was changed in Vermont that sort of opened up what schools could accept public dollars as tuition and provide education to various grades. And that really expanded the amount, the number of schools, small to somewhat large, that were private schools, but that were largely operating with public dollars flowing into them in the form of tuition. And we've got parts of the Northeast Kingdom, for example, that don't have elementary schools anywhere. So that sort of grew. So we have a system right now where, by and large, the areas that don't operate schools and need to rely on a voucher or tuitioning system, the vast majority of kids do go to these 4 historic academies or go to a public school. They just pay for it to go in another area. You can think about Hancock and Granville, for example. The few kids that are left there are probably attending public schools, or Rochester, where many of them go over one mountain range or another to attend high school. The governor, in his proposal, and like I said, we shared a lot of the same values, goals, and in fact details. In the governor's proposal, he said, we recognize that this system has to continue in some areas, that some schools have provided for the public education of our students, but in a private way. And he said, but let's limit that. Let's limit that to those schools that currently educate more than half of their students on public tuition. This is a way to sort of recognize which schools have served that function over the years. But then, in order to continue to sort of build scale and send less money out of the system to private schools, let's keep where that money goes in a narrow regional base. He also proposed that we stop paying for tuition to out-of-state private schools, something we agreed with in the House and also have that in our proposal. We recognize that there are parts of the state where they don't operate a school, but the next closest school is just over the border, that next closest school being a public school. Did nothing to change that. So we really agreed with the governor and his philosophy on this. What will happen to this system if we move to larger districts where those districts are operating, some towns with, or some sort of former districts with K-12 systems and some with choice, is going to be one of the complex problems we're going to have to deal with in the legislature as we decide how we charter each district. So that might recognize the fact that in St. Johnsbury there is no high school, but that those students go to St. Johnsbury Academy. And we might have to say that the following communities that have traditionally sent students there can contract and pay tuition to these independent entities. And essentially the governor proposed, and all of the current versions continue this, that the foundation formula number is the money that would stay with the student and would follow the student to that independent school. And just like a public school, they would have to manage their budget to the amount of tuition they were bringing in based on the foundation formula. But this is a perennial issue that continues to sort of tie us up in knots because attached to it are many many concerns with that can prompt lawsuits. We currently have a number of lawsuits in Vermont that is based on our choice system that we have. And we want to not prompt more of those, but recognize that in some areas of the state, independent schools have provided the public education for the majority of students there.
All right, thank you. The next question is about health insurance and health care costs. What discussions have there been about health insurance and how it drives increases in education costs, and can anything be done to offset it directly by paying teachers health care insurance by means of an income tax? So this has been a huge conversation in the legislature about the cost of health care. The cost of health care increased, I think, by 16% this past year, and I'm looking at maybe at the superintendent for public school employees, and then is projected to increase perhaps even more next year. It's a significant and ever-growing part of school budgets, and one of the things that is a cost driver in increasing the cost of education, and it's completely beyond the control of our school boards and our superintendents, and is an important thing in order to attract and retain high-quality teachers, but it's not directly a cost of the classroom in that it's an indirect classroom cost. Health insurance statewide and healthcare costs statewide have increased exponentially over the last 20 years. I used to serve on the Health and Welfare Committee and worked on this issue extensively. One of the reasons that I'm no longer on the Health and Welfare Committee, by the way, is because I was a little too vocal about this issue and the work that needed to be done that is pretty hard work. We have a hospital in the state of Vermont, the University of Vermont Medical Center, which is the most expensive or one of the most expensive hospitals in the country. I kid you not, in the country. And that is really driving healthcare costs in our state because it is the hospital that has the most patients. We all use it to some extent, whether you're going there for some kind of procedure or specialist or to have a baby or get a mammogram or whatever it is, we all, to some extent, use that hospital. And so it's driving the healthcare costs in our very, very small state to the extent that our health insurance our primary health insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield, is financially unstable right now, and we are doing as much as we can to sort of right that ship. So this is all impacting the cost of education and the cost of doing business regardless of what kind of business you do. So we are trying, we have had some bills come out of the Health and Welfare Committees and the Health Committee that I think will have an impact, but it will take a couple of years. One of the things, I'm looking at Rep. North, because he and I agree completely on this, is a concept called reference-based pricing, which we hope will be able to have the Green Mountain Care Board set prices based on a certain kind of service, based on a reference to the Medicare rate for that service, which tends to be lower than the private rates. That will take a couple years to implement, so we're not going to see it right away. But there are some things happening with the cost of healthcare. Unfortunately, some of the stuff that's happening at the federal level with proposed cuts to Medicaid will have the opposite effect and will increase the cost of healthcare in the state of Vermont. So that could undo any good work that we do in Vermont to bring the cost down, and that's really a scary thing right now. But in terms of the school budget perspective, the question about an income-based formula has been discussed. There was a whole committee on it. I can say I think that there is a lot of merit to it, but there's not a lot of support for it in the state legislature. So I don't think we're going to be moving forward with any kind of income-based formula, even specifically to pay for an income tax or to pay for health care. I do think there might be a potential for some kind of surcharge along the way, but not this year. I think it's something that doesn't have the political support at this point. But did you want to add something, Peter?
I did. We could spend 2 hours just on healthcare in Vermont, but I just want to draw a parallel. This is another demographic problem we have in Vermont. We are an old state. We are a high utilization state when it comes to healthcare services, and this is one of the reasons why it's costing us a lot. Meanwhile, we continue to operate 14 hospitals as full-service hospitals because moving away from that, it's very similar to education in that we like what we have. We like having a local hospital that provides all of the services that we might need, but it is very expensive. And it's just like wanting to keep our schools close and have them provide everything that we need. Healthcare is a very big problem. The governor on his desk has a report that we commissioned that really lays out a roadmap for getting those costs down. It's not fun. It's not easy because it does talk about how we need to recognize that we can't have 14 hospitals all doing full service. Unfortunately, the governor hasn't really said much about healthcare when he talks about his high priorities. It's not one of them.
So I'd like to speak on that as far as what the question goes to teachers' health insurance. So we just had we were doing a miscellaneous education bill, and one of the sections was going to be on arbitration of the health care for teachers. And when they go into arbitration right now, the way it stands is either they got to pick the teachers or the schools. Bid, if you will, or package. We were trying to see if there was an appetite because it came from the public and the school boards that, hey, can we go into arbitration and pick what's best from the two and bring it together? And wouldn't that be better for not only our taxpayers and that, and this is just talking about health care. Everybody knows the price is too much. But we're talking, it doesn't matter if it's $100 or $10,000 when you're going to negotiation. There was no appetite to do it. We got a lot of pushback from NEA and some other people. So we did not able to put that in. That would have helped our school boards and the public get a little better deal on when we negotiate the health care. Healthcare is expensive, but when we're talking about just negotiating it as far as the teacher's contract, we should be looking at that, not that, hey, we need to get it under control. So that one we did not change in the bill, but I just thought I'd mention that we did try to help to get the two sides to say, hey, we'll take a little bit from yours. Neither of us are going to be happy, but in the end, it's better for the public.
Thanks. It's obviously a very complicated issue, the whole healthcare issue. We have one last question that was a pre-question. I'm going to answer it quickly. School lunches. We went to universal school lunches a couple years ago during the pandemic, and then we made it permanent. This has been an incredibly popular program with Vermonters, with parents, with schools. It allows all kids to eat school lunch without having to pay for it, and it takes away the administration aspect of it and the collection of money from school districts. That will stay. The governor proposed taking out universal school lunches, but I think all of the proposals, and I think all three of us are all supportive of universal school lunches.
I'll speak on that real quick.
Yeah.
Before not going around and listening to teachers and principals and that, I was on the fence on that, but no longer. I think they say it's so good for the children that it's money well spent. And what we should do, though, is have a fund out there that people that say, hey, I want to pay, that they should be able to send the money just for school food so it can offset it some. And that's maybe a bill I'll try to get going at some point.
Okay, so school lunches is going to stay the same, I think, as far as that. Cell phone-free schools, there is a bill. It was in Steve's committee. Now it's in a different committee. So that's still being debated about how we might deal with cell phones in schools. It's sort of outside of this whole conversation, but I know that some people are interested in it. And then how would this impact extracurriculars and other aspects? I think that if the base amount in the foundation formula is adequate, it should pay for the extracurriculars that school districts now offer. So that's another really important reason why we have an adequate school funding base, is that so we can maintain those extracurriculars in our schools, including, you know, the arts and sports and clubs and all the things that especially older kids are crucial to their ability to enjoy and get a lot out of school. So those are the pre-questions that were submitted, and if there are other questions, Superintendent Soule has a microphone. I would like the questions to be into the microphone so everybody can understand them. So we're going to try to keep the questions to the topic of this proposal and try to keep them as brief and concise as possible, so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is
And-
Renee
yes.
McGinnis.
Thank you for stating your name.
Yes, from Moncton. And thank you for holding this forum. It's a very complicated issue, and I feel like I'm like more up to speed now. It's a full-time job, trying to stay on top of everything that's going on in all the committees. I'd like to ask if I may ask a clarification question first, and then I have an actual question. I have a clarification question about process. I guess I could direct it to Representative Conlon, since you are the chair of the House Ed Committee. So can the House Ed Committee, they didn't need to wait for the governor's proposal in order to initiate anything on their own, like the House Ed Committee could have initiated their own in-house bill to address education reform. Is that correct on process?
It is, yes. We knew a bill was coming from the governor, and we actually sort of knew what the outlines of it would be. So even before we had the bill arrive, we were already taking significant testimony on the topic.
Okay, and then my question is, H89, the school choice bill, was introduced into your committee on January 24th. School choice bill would have allowed parents to choose which school they send to. I want to add a little caveat before I get to my question, that even though out-of-state funds for Vermont students are going to out-of-state schools, it's for a Vermont student. So that money is following a Vermont student, even though those dollars are going to a school perhaps out of state. So I like it that the money follows the student. Anyway, so my question is, why was H89 not considered, which would allow parents to choose which school to send their students to? I feel like that's a missing part of this due diligence, is not looking at the cost-benefit analysis of school choice versus consolidation, which I'm against. Actually, I want to see our small community schools thrive. So could you answer that question? Why did you not take up that bill and compare it in a cost-benefit analysis to school consolidation?
Thanks. Every year there's a bill introduced, or every 2 years there's a bill introduced asking for the state to go to full choice. It has not been something that has been, as Steve would call it, there hasn't been much appetite for it. You know, we are still a political process. The Democrats continue to have the majority in both houses, and supporting and maintaining a strong public school system has been a core value of the Democratic Party forever. And those of us who are sort of deep in this look at school choice as something that would not only, drain students and resources from our public school system, but it would really create a divide, where essentially kids who, choice is only a choice for those who can make the choice and have the resources to fulfill that choice. If you can't have transportation to where it is you want to go, or the additional cost that might be part of it, then you don't really have a choice. And we start dividing kids up into the kids who can afford to do one thing and the kids who can't afford to do another. And I'll go right down to even more core belief for me, and that is that I see public schools as the place where young people of all backgrounds come together and learn together and work together. And for me, that is really a core foundation of our society.
Is there another question out there? Yeah, sir.
Yes. Yes, hi, I'm Dan Rosignol, and from Addison, and I'm on the Hannaford School Board, and I've got a question for you on the funding. So this is going to go to our math whiz here on the left. Currently, they have a competitive funding model for career centers, and that works, but it takes money from the schools, and it creates a conflict, whether that is recognized or not. A school's going to send a kid to the career center, they're going to lose money. And there needs to be something else done for this. And the career centers need to know how much funding they're going to get ahead of time. Again, all this uncertainty going around, so that's part of it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I think Nicole is feeling like, hey, what about me in all of this conversation with what about the career centers? And that actually has been part of our conversation in the State House, but it hasn't sort of taken center stage. The bill, as it came out of the House, had some language about a report back about career and tech education. The Senate Education Committee added some language about what private schools could do for career and tech, actually. But then I think that there have been some proposals also about creating a CTE weight in the formula, and there were various proposed, and I know Steve's committee talked about that a little bit, but there hasn't been enough analysis on what that weight should be and how it would work. Our career, and as you probably know better than me, our CTE centers around the school or all around the state are all governed differently. Some of them are embedded in schools, some of them are independent, some of them are tuition-based. They're all different, and so we need to really get a much more cohesive model for how we do career and tech education in our state, and that's part of what the report back. There have been a bunch of studies, and they haven't led to anything yet. But what I think we should, and what I'm going to try to include is a study by the researcher, Tammy Colby, who has done the work on the foundation formula to do the analysis for creating a multi-tiered CTE weight. Kind of like there's a multi-tiered special education weight, there's a multi-tiered English language learning weight based on the proficiency of English, based on the type of the cost of your special education needs, and I think we could do similar for the different types of career and technical education. I've talked to her about whether such an analysis is possible, and she said yes, it is, as long as they have the data, the time, and the money to do that analysis. So I'm hoping that we can add that to the bill and really integrate career and tech ed into the foundation formula in a way that doesn't create this sort of tug and pull between CTE and the sort of quote unquote regular education. So I'm hopeful that we can move in that direction, but we certainly can't do that next year. In the meantime, I have been working with Nicole on trying to get some language in that would help her get some students who are on waiting lists from other areas of the state to get to the Hannaford Career Center, and hopefully benefit those students, use the beautiful facility we have, and reduce the cost per pupil overall for all of the school districts.
Steve and I were just chatting here quickly. I think that the bills that came out of each of our committees just recognizes that CTE funding is a very complex beast and something to be dealt with next year.
Is there another question? Oh, Dave.
Yes, so thank you, Senator, and both senators and Representative Conlon for your work. It's a tremendously difficult topic. And you began by talking about 3 districts in Addison County. We actually have 4 districts in Addison County, and I'm grateful for your comments about CTE because I think it's maybe the biggest problem that we have in education in Vermont, and we have this wonderful opportunity to make some big changes that will be good for students and equity, as Superintendent Reen referred to. I don't think we'll attain it until we have some sort of seamless ability for students to take advantage of CTE so that we do have the plumbers and electricians and cooks and other jobs that we can't phone India to come and fix the sink, right? So thanks for your comments on that, and I look forward to work on that. My question has to do with the first comment about school choice. There is tension in the state, as you heard in the first question, and in our nation, this desire to, we all like to go to the grocery store and pick our own cheese. And this notion that public education is important. We just came back from Greece, where they had a democracy where they only let the educated people vote. In Vermont and in the U.S., we've chosen to educate everybody and allow everybody to vote. And I applaud the work in public education. My question is, as you go forward and finish your work on this bill, particularly around the foundation formula and funding schools in Vermont, that we don't continue to create a disparity in funding available for private school students versus public school students, because private school proponents often go out there and say, well, private schools produce a lot better students. Well, they can pick and choose their students, and they spend right now between $20,000 and $25,000 per pupil on their kids. So what are your foundation formulas going to do to create equity among public and private school students? And then going forward, is there an inflationary function in these foundation formulas? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yes, there is an inflationary part of the foundation formulas year to year to recognize that costs increase. And I say probably the three of us are in agreement that when it comes to tuitioning to private schools, that the amount of funding should be the same whether the student is going to a public school or a private school. And in all versions of the bill, it simply has the dollars following the student. Period.
And we did take testimony from the independent schools going, is this, the funding, if this is what the set rate, they're like, we could live with that. I think we had three independent schools come in and say, if we're on a foundation formula, if this is what we're working with, we can handle that.
We do need to be careful, of course, because if $19,000 is following a student to an independent school, and that independent school charges private pay people $9,000, that requires some state oversight.
Yeah, I would just add, sort of along those lines, one of the concerns among many I have about sending public dollars to private schools is that there's not oversight. They do not have a public board. They do not have public accounting. You can see the accounting of all of the work that these folks all do in the front row. It is public information, and the budgets are public, and that is not true with private schools. So if we're sending public money to private schools, we do not know how they're spending it, and we can't get that information. I would say that the money following the student is how the foundation formula is supposed to work. But one of the things that the Senate Education Committee did was include a weight for high schools, which the empirical analysis showed was not necessary. And one of the reasons that they chose to include a weight for high schools was so that private high schools could get that extra money for high school students. So I have concerns about including a weight that is not empirically based in order to benefit private schools. There also was language added to the Senate Education Committee version of the bill that would allow private schools to charge whatever they wanted to for CTE. Whatever they wanted to, that's what the language says. And that is also extremely problematic. Our public schools can't do that. So there are some changes that need to be done to make sure that we are not treating private schools more, providing additional funding to private schools that don't go to our public schools. I would agree with Peter. I think our public schools are the basis of our democracy here in the United States. The American public school system was grown up as alongside our American democracy, and they go hand in hand. And if we degrade public education, we degrade American democracy, and we need to make sure that we protect both. So thank you.
A slight rebuttal to this, that the schools we're talking about have been in Vermont for 100+ years, teaching Vermont students for 100+ years. They're woven into the fabric. I totally concur if you had a new school starting up, and that won't be possible under the new law. So it's hard for us that 85% of all kids over in that area, well, let me correct you. Essex County, they're the biggest ones that pay tuition. They have no high school, and most 9 or 10 towns tuition their kids to go to wherever they want to go. 85% of them children, or students I should say, go to Canaan because it's the most convenient for the parent. So I agree with my colleagues on some matters, but in these particular incidents, that these schools that we're talking about have been an integral part of Vermont, as well as the therapy schools. That is another whole realm. But I'm sure we can come to common ground eventually.
It would be fun to have a debate sometime, Steve. I look forward to that. Maybe next year. But there's a question here. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you guys for coming here and spending a morning with us. My name is Stephen Fleming. I'm a resident of Ferrisburg, and I did stand on that stage in 1972 and graduate.
Woohoo!
June 14th, to be exact. My question is, well, first off, a little more about me. I do substitute teach in Addison Northwest and Northeast school districts, and I have a good perspective on how the schools operate. My question is, did the legislature consider going to county-wide school districts? Like Addison County, Chittenden County. I mean, you got 13 counties in Vermont, if my memory serves me correctly, and the only one that doesn't have a high school is Grand Isle County. Would that be a feasibility in the near future?
So that is a question that we have left to a group of people. We differ on who that group of people should be in terms of drawing what are these new districts going to be. Everybody has a philosophy or an idea, one of them being county districts, other being CTE regions, and each one has its own sort of flaw and advantage. I would say one of the challenges with just using county lines is that we have districts such as Rutland Northeast, or what we now call Otter Valley, that serves 3 towns in Addison County. So if you were to sort of cut that off, how does that impact the district that is now? The lines can cut across school districts, and one of the things that, at least in our bill, we seek to maintain to the extent possible is to sort of keep school districts themselves together. County lines can impede that concept.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that some version of a county map might make a lot of sense. In addition to the complexity that Peter mentioned, we do have a couple really tiny counties, Grand Isle County and Essex County, so we would have to combine them with another county. And then Chittenden County is a really big county, so we might not be able to have a full Chittenden County. So I think that concept is one that has been discussed, and a lot of the analysis that has been done on a county basis, and that's how we know that Addison County is hit the hardest with the new funding formula. So our joint fiscal office, which does a lot of the financial analysis, has looked on a county basis, and so I think that's not off the table. So you're thinking along the same lines as a lot of people.
One other comment, I'd like to thank the Hannaford staff here for, I'm hearing they're putting together an emergency medical program down there. And yeah, I'm the guy that wrote the letter. I think that's going to benefit us all right here. Like I said, I work in both school systems as a substitute teacher, and knowing, and I was part of Rescue here for 40 some odd years, and it's going to help, I think, get these kids educated in the need for this type of service to the community. And Vermont has a paramedic program now, so I think we're on the right track.
Thank you. Got a few more questions. We want to make sure we can get to them.
Yeah, this is more of an observation. My name's Ethan Bowen. I'm your little weird cousin in Rochester. And we're also, because we're the little bit of you, but then we're a totally different district. We are the largest supervisory district geographically. And Jamie Canarney has done just extraordinary work. Just to tell you, it takes 1 hour and 15 minutes to go from Rochester to Chelsea. That's how big we are. So we have some indication of what size is going to mean in the future. Jamie Canarney has done an extraordinary job in weathering these incredible volatility between these small schools, Chelsea, Tunbridge, Rochester, Stockbridge. I was on the board for 5 years and 2 as chairman right at the point when a lot of the volatility was happening. And just, I guess the observation is, when I heard about this plan early in the year, I just took a big sigh because they've just settled this district, this supervisory union. It's just going well. And suddenly, the whole thing's going to get stirred up again. I totally understand. I loved your image about digging the hole because Rochester sat on a high school years beyond when it should have been closed and should have been seen. And it's just, it's lingering. We have these, this is our team, this is our town, and this is the thing we deal with. And I take a big breath and say, okay, this may be the end of our school. I guess the bottom line is this thing about, I know equity is, gosh, I just want you to make the right decisions. It's that simple. And I really appreciate the work you're doing and what you presented here today. I've just seen the fight and how people stick their hands in, and it's like, not in my town. You're not taking that away from me. And that's the part we don't talk about. We all lived through it. I know you've lived through it here, and we certainly lived through it. I lived through it firsthand, listening to people on the phone just screaming at me. I guess I don't really have a question. You've answered a lot for me. It's just this big sigh.
Yeah.
Here we go again.
Ethan, thank you so much for those comments. And shout out to the Rochester folks and Huntington folks who have had similar issues with the where their towns are located and how it's impacted their school system and their school districts. And thanks for all the people who are listening. I know there are people in Rochester listening to this. And I hear you. Peter and I went through Act 46 and the upheaval at the same time you were, and it was exhausting and a lot of work to get to a functional school district, which Wendy now leads. And I think there is a lot of concern about this upheaval and will it disrupt some of the things that are working, especially at a time when the federal government situation is so unstable. So you're not alone in those concerns. Is there another? Yeah, go ahead. You have the mic.
So real quick, Bill Biederman. I'm on the Hannaford Career Board. Also lived in Rochester, but now live in Middlebury. And there are two things I wanted to mention. One was, has the state done an inventory of all the school facilities that we have? Do they have grades for them? And have they looked at that as a way to actually divide up the state? And one of the reasons I mentioned that is the Hannaford Career Board has kept everything up. We've done bonds locally because people supported what we did. The other thing that I wanted to mention real quick is it's wonderful to talk about education and moving people around and things like that, but nobody has discussed transportation, where the money's going to come from it, how we're going to do it, and what are we going to do with kids who are on the bus for 1 hour and 15 minutes every day, one way.
So, Bill, to answer your question about school facilities, yes, we've done a full inventory of all the school buildings in the state, public school buildings in the state. And with a condition index attached to each one, I'd say it's very evenly distributed. It would be hard to draw maps based on the condition of our buildings because there are plenty of poorly maintained buildings throughout the state, and I'm not quite sure how you would configure lines around it. In terms of transportation and how we build forward, I mean, if and when we create new districts and new district school boards, their job is not going to be easy. They are still going to have to make hard decisions. I've often said that, school decisions really come down to how much time is a kid going to sit in a school bus. That's tricky. That's why I think that we continue to sort of think about the philosophy of needing to keep our youngest students as close to home as possible to mitigate that, but understand that as students get older, they can handle a bit of a longer bus ride. I'll just, my own experience growing up, I grew up in Montpelier. Everything was very close. I still had an hour bus ride because the bus went all over town picking up and dropping off kids. So getting to that is challenging. I think that the cost of transportation, depending on the level of sort of consolidation that may or may not happen, will always be an issue, but so is the cost of maintaining a staff that every building needs to have a certain number of people being paid in it, or the cost of heating and cooling. So balancing all of those and what's more cost effective is certainly part of it, but really part of it also needs to be what's best for kids in terms of providing opportunity and education and high quality instruction throughout our state.
I saw one other, Barb, go ahead. Oh, and then there's another, and Andrew, and then there's a question over here as well.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Barbara Wilson, and I live in Shoreham. I'm on the ACSD school board. First of all, I want to thank you guys. I have been listening. It's sometimes hard, and thank God for the recording, so I can go back and in the wee hours of the morning, listen to you guys really talk about these hard issues. For me, at the end, it's really how our kids are doing. And when we look at the state as a whole, our outcome data for literacy and math, is, definitely needs to be improved. And so my question is, how are we going to ensure that we get the outcomes that we really desire and that the changes that we're making do in fact help us get those outcomes?
That's an incredibly important question. As we move to a foundation formula with weights, how do we ensure that the added weights or the added money to the foundation formula is serving those students for whom it is intended? Vermont traditionally has not been a state educationally that is a big fan of data and testing to make sure that we are achieving the outcomes that we want. That is probably something that has to change. I know we have a somewhat controversial new Secretary of Education, but one thing I will give her credit for is that she really believes that we need to have more accountability for how the money is spent and achieving the necessary outcomes. Whether that's going to be, because that comes down to essentially evaluating children and testing them to make sure that they're being taught what we want them to be taught. That's not necessarily a very popular position, but when it comes to investing dollars in a highly effective way, we really need to have that data available to us.
Andrew, go for it.
Yes, Andrew Pizzullo from Middlebury, Vermont. And I think at one time I was probably one of the most expensive public school teachers in the state. I taught at Rochester High School as it was going down. And I had as few as 2 students in the classroom. Can you believe that? Or 4. Some days, some semesters, it would take me half the day to see 20 students. So very expensive. And I'm just wondering, why did the Senate take minimum class sizes out then? Because, again, it's extremely expensive.
The question was, why did the Senate take out minimum average class sizes?
For the rural districts, it was that it was going to hurt, let's say like Lincoln, if they couldn't meet, they're doing an efficient job, they're staying where they need to be in their budget, why shouldn't they continue to be able to exist? If we did it by minimum class size, they might not have done that, and then it's like, okay, now we're pressuring you to say you need to close your doors, even though you're doing a great job. We are pressuring you to close your doors, but it also opens up years down the line if they're not efficient. That it's like, okay, you're not efficient. Maybe you should think about combining with another school, such as Shoreham and Bridport are looking at right now. Hard decisions, but it's what we hope local communities will do, because that's what I'd want to do. I'd want to talk over with my local community as being in the local community and saying, hey, this is not working. I'm not looking forward to my child riding the bus a little longer, but they're not getting as good an education as they could if they went and joined with another school.
I might ask the question a different way. Why did we put them in the House? And I guess I would answer that for two reasons. Well, three. One, the governor in his proposal also had that in his at a higher ratio. And for us in the House, we really took a lot of testimony. And I think what we heard was that class sizes matter. And that there is a certain level at which you can achieve a classroom that takes on a life of its own, and students start learning from students, and it doesn't become incumbent on the teacher to be essentially sort of standing in front and talking and talking and talking all day long. We heard it over and over again from teachers. But probably the biggest reason we put it in is because we were asked to by educators. I would say we took a great deal of testimony, and I really want to give a shout out to all of these people sitting in front, because they have either testified in our committee or have met with the three of us and others from Addison County to educate us as to how schools operate. And they all said to us, we know where we need to be. We need an assist from the state. I think one of the sort of key philosophical differences you see between the House and the Senate versions is we really feel that the state needs to provide local districts an assist in making these decisions so that they can have a certain ability to say, you know, the rest of the state is going in this direction, we need to be going in this direction, it's what the law says. I think the Senate version is more to say, here's the money you are getting, you need to make the decisions to manage to that money. And that is going to put school boards and superintendents in very difficult positions that are already going to be difficult enough.
You have a question back there behind Andy? Yeah, you with the microphone.
Hi, me
I'm
with the
sorry.
microphone. Hi, it's Stacy Peters from Hancock. You all know me by my email. I'm really sorry.
Oh, hi, Stacy. I didn't know
Hi.
that was you.
Yeah, it's me. So I guess I had a couple of, I'm going to try to be concise. I'm under-caffeinated. So this is not going to bode well. But so I live in Hancock. I'm the chair of the Granville-Hancock School Board. We don't operate a district. We don't operate schools. We tuition our kids everywhere. Ethan's neighbor. And I moved into Hancock right when we closed our village school, and I joined the school board during Act 46. Representative Conlon, you mentioned earlier that this, what the plan is now, looks a lot like Act 46, but with more state, I think you called it guidance, and it made my heart stop. Because for me and the, 54% of people who live in rural towns, Act 46 was not seen as a great success. You also mentioned in your opening remarks that closing central offices and supervisory unions will hopefully save some money, and that also put me into mild cardiac arrest. Because I don't think we can base this on hope. We need to see what we need not to be here in another 10 years. And so when I've heard the conversation about the cost drivers, about health insurance, about changing the way we're taxing people, about maybe removing property taxes, the only real marker of wealth or capacity, the answer is there's nothing we can do about that. But then we continue to just merge and consolidate into oblivion. And so I guess my question is this foundation formula enough? And what stops us from being here in another 10 years? So, sorry, that was heated.
Is the foundation formula enough? I think it depends on how we build that foundation formula, and that's what I've spent a lot of time trying to explain, why we need an empirically based foundation formula that provides an adequate education and has the weights that are appropriate in order to meet the standards for individual students. So and I would say that that foundation formula is not the only thing in the proposal. You know, the way the governor proposed it and the House's version, you know, sent it to the Senate, it was a combination of the way that we fund schools, the way schools are organized and governed, the way the House added a bunch of provisions about standards and accountability, and then there was the tax part of it, and how do we tax Vermonters in order to pay for our schools. And so in terms of the tax part of it, it would be a statewide property tax, just like we have now. We have a statewide property tax. It's just a different funding formula that's based on taxing capacity and not based on an adequacy amount per pupil. So it's a different sort of concept. And for those of you who've been around for a while following education, that taxing capacity formula that we have came out of a court order in the late 1990s that led to what's called Act 60. That court order came from a case called Brigham, which came from Addison County in Whiting, and it was that the state was not providing an adequate education based on where students lived. So we are also trying to sort of bridge that gap and make sure that what our foundation formula does provide an adequate education for every student, no matter where they live. So I think that was what your question finally was will this be adequate? But I feel like there was more to it than that. And I also, Stacy, since you came in person, I'm happy to talk to you because you sent me a long email, but I think it might be more appropriate afterwards to get into the weeds with you. But did you want to add something, Steve?
Was your question if you thought the $14,800 and some odd dollars was adequate? Is that, how do we know it's enough? Is that the actual?
Right.
I believe that's what our committees are dedicated to doing.
Yeah, I think we're trying to do that. I mean, certainly one of the cost drivers that we talked about was healthcare. Another cost driver in our education system is scale. One of the reasons that our schools are so much more expensive in Vermont is our scale. Our schools are way, 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 way smaller than anywhere else in the country, by a lot. Our districts are much, much smaller. Our classrooms are much, much smaller. And we have a much more complex governance system than anywhere else in the country. And all of those things contribute to the cost of education in Vermont. We also have higher or lower teacher-pupil ratios. And we have an aging population and a declining enrollment in our schools, and those are all cost drivers. The housing is a cost driver, and the lack thereof, and the cost of health care. The big spike in property taxes last year was a result of a number of things. Part of it was those cost drivers. Part of it was coming still out of the pandemic and having really high student needs in our classroom that these people can talk about in much more detail than I can. And losing the federal funding from post-COVID that was meant to meet those needs. And also because of a change in the funding formula that we made in order to try to make our funding formula more equitable, and it was not implemented well. And it had a few things in it that were done incorrectly. So we tried to correct those, but there was a spike in education costs that caused a spike in property taxes. And for communities like yours, there was also this spike in property values that also impacted the tax rates. Coming out of COVID, we saw a lot of property values increase a huge amount, and a lot of communities that are behind in reappraising their properties. Part of the bill that we haven't even talked about yet is a whole different system, a whole upgrade on how we appraise property in our state, which is definitely connected to our school finance system, but nobody, it's a lot more weedy. And if there are any select board members in the room, are there any select board members in the room? Select board, right. Select board members love to talk to me about this, but the way that we reappraise our property is pretty out of date compared to the rest of the country. If we can upgrade the way we do that, that will also help with our property tax situation, and that is actually in the bill. Also, categories of taxpayers. Right now we have a homestead rate and a non-homestead rate. The bill contemplates creating a homestead rate and 3 different non-homestead rates, one for rental properties, one for second homes, and one for primary residences. And then we can have a lot more control over where we target the property tax rates. And maybe people might want to see a higher rate for people who can afford a second home in Vermont. So those are things in the bill that we didn't really talk about, but those are part of the big picture about how we're trying to make it more equitable and affordable, both for our schools, but also for our taxpayers. And I think we have one more, I hope, and we'll talk more. We have one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap.
Hi. I think everyone can hear me, yes? I'm Leah Forrester. I'm in Ferrisburg, along with my first grader, Lila. I have a 3-part question, but want to keep it punchy. So first, we've talked about this, so the whole conversation started because taxes went up so much last year. I wanted to get back to the sort of brass tacks of the math. I don't know the total number of what do we spend on education as a state today, and what does the proposal mean for how much we would spend when it's enacted? So what's the actual difference that we'd be making from a numbers perspective, part 1. 2, you talked about cost drivers, one of which is scale. It sounds like there were proposals to make minimum school sizes, and by Wrong's proposal, I think, and then minimum class sizes. It sounds like those have been taken away, which in many ways I feel good about, although I do think we need to have some sort of teeth to ensure that we actually address the cost driver. So my second question is, what is the rulemaking or requirements around how schools would be forced to consolidate or close? Right now, most districts have policies where the towns vote to make that decision. How would that policy work? Since we don't have any, it sounds like, state mandates around minimum school sizes or class sizes in this new proposal, though that is a cost driver, we're not really addressing it. How would that rulemaking work? Second question. And then third question, how are we changing rules around the state board versus the agency of education, and how will that impact students?
Maybe I'll work backwards. So this bill contemplates no changes in sort of the agency doing what the agency does and the state board doing what the state board does. The governor's proposal did. It was going to shift a lot of the power from the State Board of Education, which basically takes the laws that we pass and turns them into rules. The one sort of difference between what came out of the House and what is currently in the Senate is that in ours we proposed that 2 of the members of the state board be nominated and put on by the legislature itself. Right now, all appointees are the governor's appointees, even though what the work of the state board is the work that we delegate to it. It's the legislative powers of making rules. Back up to who decides what happens within each school district. It would be the new school board. And hopefully with some guidance from the state as to what it is, sort of the vision of the state is. And then moving sort of one level up above that, I think your question had more to do with
Yeah, so how much does the state spend this year? It's $1.88 billion on education. That's the education spending total, without trying to get into the weeds again, that doesn't include everything. There are some things, categorical aids, federal funding, local funding, that are not included in that amount, but it's usually what's used for cost comparison, so $1.88 billion. The House version of the foundation formula would have spent a little bit more than that. I think it's an extra $35 million, depending on how you do the math, which is really kind of a rounding error when you get to numbers that big. The Senate Education Committee backed into the $1.88 billion and based their foundation amount based on this year's spending. There is, as we mentioned previously, there is an inflation adjustment that's made on the foundation amount in all versions of the bill. It's just a question of what index we use, and that actually matters because there are lots of different indexes. So hopefully that answers your questions. I just want to say we've gone over time, so I want to again thank Nikki and Glory and all of the superintendents and school people who came, and all of you for coming today. Thank you so much for being so engaged in this really important topic. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good weekend, and for all the mothers in the audience and watching at home, happy Mother's Day. Thanks.